I think for purposes of our call tonight, I think the big topic of discussion is going to be around the ordinance. And so to ensure we're maximizing, maximum participation of our fellow commissioners, maybe we'll reserve that and we'll roll through the other items on the agenda to give folks some time to get in the room before we get into the meaty stuff. So I have circulated a copy of the January minutes. I was chuckling to myself today as I was recirculating it because I realized we didn't actually conduct ordinary business in February because, as y'all know, we had a lengthy appeal. And then in March, we couldn't actually achieve quorum. So we've actually not had opportunity to approve our January minutes. But I recirculated them earlier, sent them around in January. Have those of you on the phone had an opportunity to take a gander through those minutes? Okay.
Yep.
Great. And any edits or comments to them? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
Motion to approve minutes.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor? Thanks, Sean. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Okay, so the January minutes have passed unanimously via our quorum here. Gurjeet, can I kick it over to you for the executive director's report?
Yep. Nothing new to report on here. Just at some point, I know you guys have been busy with your ordinance, getting that wrapped up. But at some point, I know Helen, you and the commissioners had asked to see if we could get the vendor for the AAP back. So, just when you have time, just circle back and let me know what month you're still thinking for that.
Oh, I thought they were on our docket for May. Is that not the case?
I can confirm with her if you still like that for May.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think absolutely. If we can get them in on May, I think we've all been planning on it.
Okay, and did you just want another overview of their process, or was it something specific that you wanted to talk to her about?
Yeah, I mean, we'll go back through all of the notes and the minutes of our prior discussion around it, but I think, guys on the phone, please course correct me. I think what we wanted to see was the same training that they give to that the vendor is giving to the workforce, so that all of the commissioners have the benefit of understanding whatever everybody else is seeing and hearing, and then sort of the same kind of, to whatever degree in that training, they're going over the affirmative action plan results for this year. But I was thinking we were going to get the same thing that the workforce is getting.
Okay, so the workforce heard from the vendor really for the first time in kind of a training type thing on December 1st. That was the first time we tried it with a broader workforce, like basically kept it open to anybody. So I think that may have been what's inspired, inspired the commissioners to ask for the same training. So I'll have her basically do that same kind of thing for you guys and see, just confirm she can do it in May. But we did that in December with everybody, and she just went through the AAP and explained how they got what they got, how they get the results.
And how long, Gurjeet, is that training?
I don't think the slides are very long. I think we allotted an hour for the overview, just in case there were questions from folks. And again, this was open to anybody, whether it was HR folks or directors or anyone to come and attend. So it's up to you how long you want her. If you just want her to go over the slides, that'll probably take 15-20 minutes. But I imagine you'd probably want some Q&A. So you may want to allot at least 45 total, I would think, at minimum.
Yeah, that's great. I think we do want the Q&A, and I think we'd love to see whatever the workforce has seen. And if there's any other component of it that gets a little bit more granular on the plan that mimics what we would have seen last year, I think that was helpful to the commissioners. I think it was a fruitful session. So, if there's anything deeper that he or she wants to get into with us, I think we'd welcome it.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Anything else, Gurjeet, on your docs on executive director report?
Nothing else. It's new at the moment. Same old.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Gurjeet has sent the statistical reports. I think, Gurjeet, you sent that around last week. Any questions from the commission on any of those reports? Okay. Any extensions, we could, Sean, sort of kick around the member reports right now. I'm just sort of looking to see who we've got so far. Anything, Sean, on the Equality Task Force front?
Nothing as of yet. Gurjeet, have you or has HRC reached out to you?
Or
Just like an introduction, because, you know, we there was that change in personnel, and they have been sort of radio silent, and that's kind of,
yeah,
I
it's
don't
been
know,
odd.
maybe disheartening. So
No, they haven't reached out to me. If they reach out to you, please let me know. And likewise, I'll let you know. I haven't heard anything from them in recent months.
okay, sure, I'll re-engage as well, and maybe, I mean, I have no problem even stopping by HRC headquarters in DC sometime. If I can just make time to, if we don't get a response within the next month, I will probably just do that.
Okay. Okay.
And
Awesome.
Sean, question for you.
I'll let you
and this
know.
is-
Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry, guys, I think I have a delay on my computer, so my apologies if I'm cutting anybody off. It's not intentional. Sean, question for you on Equality Task Force and in particular the MEI score. Are you still tracking on the anti-bullying policy, inclusion of conversion therapy language in the ordinance? I think that's it. Those are the two open items, or is there anything else?
I guess the other one was the same-sex partner health benefits. Is that what it is, Gurjeet? I think that was the last. Those three issues, I think, were the things that just kept getting. The county keeps getting dinged by
Yeah,
from
but
HRC.
I think two of those things, though, and I don't want to put Anna on the spot because I haven't looked at it recently, but there are two things that we, I think, didn't get credit for, and that we should have. One they fixed, actually, which was LGBTQ liaison, and I've been that since I've been here, but for some reason they used to give us credit, last year they did, and then they fixed it. But the other thing was the benefits, and they specifically, I think they wanted a certain piece of information beyond what we submitted, like something from Kaiser saying specifically in a certain way. And, you know, and without being able to reach them, like I think I've shared with the commission earlier when we were trying to get a score correction, even though we have a perfect score, there were some areas where we could have gotten bonus points that we didn't, and it was not due to what we thought were responsive responses. But they just didn't respond.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was the staff turnover as well. So hopefully they've got some stability now since Colin left, and, you know, the new staff is transitioning on board and stuff. And I'll reach out again just to make sure, because usually they'll send out the MEI, sort of the draft of what they're looking for around the June timeframe, if that's my understanding. And then so we'll get the sort of the preview of that. So we'll keep pinging them, Gurjeet, and if I hear something, I'll certainly let you know, and that way we can make contact with the staff there.
Perfect. Thank you. Likewise.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, and again, I'm putting a really fine point on this issue only because it's going to relate to what we'll talk about with respect to the ordinance. And I wish we had more people on the line, but I'll just roll into it for sake of having a cohesive meeting here. We're going to have to decide tonight on what our strategic approach is going to be with respect to the ordinance, right? And one of the paths will be to include a very, very light markup for now. In fact, why don't I just take a step back and I'm just going to launch into it. I've been trying to buy time to let more folks join. Oh, there we go. Whitney, how are you?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we've got you now. You've joined at the absolute perfect time because I was just going to pivot over into a discussion of the ordinance. We have, just to catch you up, Whitney, we've kind of rolled through the other administrative pieces of our agenda so that we can really reserve our time for a good fulsome discussion on the ordinance. Okay. And where we were was just hearing from Sean on the Equality Task Force and some of the missing pieces that will factor into a higher score on the MEI index. And one of the three open pieces is whether we have legislated for the conversion therapy ban. And if we have that in our local ordinance, we fare better on the MEI index, which is a very good thing for us. So just pin that as I'm about to sort of frame up what our options are on a go forward basis with respect to the ordinance. But let me start by just giving everybody on the line who's not on the drafting committee an overview of the work that has happened to date. Okay. This exercise started in, I believe, Roland, you course correct me if I get any of the history wrong here, but I think in 2019, with a drafting committee comprised of a number of commissioners, Roland included, as well as some folks who have departed from the commission. So this would have included Paul Lewis and maybe a few others. When Stephen joined the commission, Stephen joined the drafting commission. Roland has been continuously on it. At some point, Carol joined it as well. And then I joined back up after I returned from maternity leave, and so did Whitney. So we've had a lot of people touch the ordinance over time. In Roland 2020, I think it was either December of 2019 or January of 2020, I think you submitted a markup of the ordinance to the board where it languished in COVID times for a pretty significant chunk of time. We tickled them a number of times, and Christian did a phenomenal job of really pushing it through and pushing it down to the county attorney's office for their review, which they did a fulsome review of last summer, and came back with a pretty heavy markup, a pretty heavy red line of issues to go back and look at. The drafting committee, which was a smaller group and a slightly different group at that point, met with the county attorney twice last summer and into the fall, iterating on some of their comments and some of their markups. From that point, Stephen did a phenomenal job of taking all of, version control issues and incorporating it into a draft document. And Stephen and I then worked on together trying to put it to a final form. We did that. I think it was in February or early March. And then we reconvened the drafting committee to work through those edits and get alignment from the drafting committee on what the full package, from our perspective, needs to look like, inclusive of all of the edits that we want to include aspirationally. Once the drafting committee was comfortable with that, which was sort of mid-March, we took that package and we gave it back to the county attorney to say, listen, we've incorporated all your feedback from last summer. We've worked it through as a committee and as a commission. Here it is. We hope that we're pretty close to final. Off we go. In the meantime, as county attorney's office was reviewing the markup that we gave them in March, Whitney has gone through a campaign of meeting individually with several of the board members to preview what's coming in terms of the ordinance. And before I turn it over to you, Whitney, to voice over what that looked like, I'll also tell you that I testified at the budget committee hearing in March, and I used our allotted time in that regard to also preview to the board writ large what is coming, what changes we want to see. And I also put a little tickler in there, Sean, on the anti-bullying policy, which has also languished, just like the initial draft of the ordinance has, just to make sure it's on everybody's radar screen. So tonight, after we hear from Whitney on what the kind of temperature is of the board members, we need to decide what iteration of the ordinance we want to present and when. And I'll walk you through what the options are momentarily, but Whitney, maybe you can give us an overview of your lobbying efforts now.
Okay, thank you. That was actually really helpful, even to me, who's kind of been, that was a great little timeline. As many of you know, I am not only a commissioner, but I am the president and one of the co-founders of Black Parents of Arlington. And so I have been lobbying back and forth with various county board members and school board members for the past 5-7 years on issues with regards to human rights, not just for Black children, but for all marginalized children, for free and reduced lunch kids, for all racial or BIPOC kids, I don't like the word minority, English language learners, and children with disabilities. And so there's been that context of the work that I've been doing. The temperature is, particularly since there's been a few deaths, untimely, obviously, and unfortunate, obviously, in our schools of students. One a few years ago at Yorktown in terms of a suicide, and most recently at Wakefield with a child who overdosed in the bathroom and laid unconscious and dying with no one coming to his rescue for what seems to be an incredibly long amount of time. So the long and short of it is that the temperature is it's one of those, it's kind of like the racial reckoning with George Floyd, right? Like when you're seeing it, when it's impossible not to sort of escape it. One of the things that I've made sure that the county recognizes, one of the problems with the county, for anyone who doesn't know, is that we have a school board and we have a county board, and they act as though they really don't have anything in common. So the schools are seen by the county as and Stephen understands this too, and he may be able to say it in a more effective way, but the county is always like, well, we give them money, but we really don't have any influence or determination over what happens in the school, which doesn't really make much sense. And then the schools are saying, well, we're waiting for the county and we need help and we have these things. So it's really what has happened certainly in the last 20 years at least, is that we've got things going on in the schools and everyone's like, but I can't do anything about it. I don't know who's going to do anything about it. And what has been clear, and what I've made sure that the county board members know, is that Arlington actually has a long history of being on the more progressive ends of human rights and civil rights, what we call it in this country, when it comes to racial justice. And that basically, for lack of a better way of saying it, we can have Black Parents of Arlington sue APS schools in Arlington, or we can find a way or anyone can sue anyone. It's a litigious, we live in America. Or we can find a way for parents and teachers and students and families to be able to work within the realm of the Human Rights Commission and non-litigious means in order to create better outcomes for students and families and teachers. And so I think that they understand that. Again, I was just talking to the daughter of Dorothy Ham. And again, Arlington in 1959 was the place where desegregation actually ended, based on the work of Black parents and Black mothers specifically in ensuring that there was racial justice in the schools. Black parents have never stopped caring about that. All parents care about those things for their children, and we need to figure out a way, hopefully, to be able to make those types of changes in the school system and investigations into what's going on in our school systems, that hopefully one would imagine that there are other ways to do it other than having to work through the court system. So I think that they understood that. I believe that there's a lot. One of the things that I said to all of them is, it is on all of us that as a mother, I care that I really care that there's a child who didn't come home, that there's a mother who moved to America, assuming that they were moving their child into a safe space and the child never came home. I think that we have an obligation as a community to investigate things like that and to make sure that we are doing, in a highly wealthy, resourced community that's also highly diverse, that we are doing the best that we can in terms of a human rights mechanism for making sure that the most marginalized and vulnerable of our constituents and our citizenry, particularly children, are protected. So that seems to have been understood. It is, and Helen, you'll go into it, why, even though there are so many, there's in a larger mechanism, I've also made sure that they understand that there are aspects about bullying and conversion. There are all these other looming issues that maybe haven't killed a child in the schools in the last couple weeks, but would be nice if we were able to get to and add before something that happens. And so instead of being reactive and having to go piecemeal with certain things because our ordinance is not sufficient to protect the rights of our most vulnerable, that we don't want to just continue to be reactive and wait 2 years and then put this through and then wait another 2 years until something else happens. But to that extent, they do know that this is coming in general. I told them that we didn't know exactly what the iteration would be. I did let them know that we were talking to the county attorney's office. I am of the impression now that for me, and we'll talk about it, the best, and I talked to Chris at length after his conversation with the county attorney, is to make sure that we give, because of the situation as it is now, if anybody does not know, the principal of Wakefield has been reassigned as of the next school year. So there are small things that are happening sort of kind of, but there's no transparency. It's not clear what's going on. And so I just think that being able to create a mechanism that doesn't necessitate, litigation for these schools now in this, hyper sort of emergency means is the best way to go. But with them also understanding that within a few months, we are going to be also delivering something more complete. And one of the things that we can talk about is maybe it's easier. I think I like the fact that we're going back and forth with the county attorney's office, because then there's less, we know exactly what their issues are, but to also start documenting those, right? Like they have their policy complaints, they have some legal issues potentially. And if we are also marking them and submitting those along with whatever our recommendations are, I think that also goes a long way in the broader change to the ordinance. And I think that now we start with, this is the change that we want to make. Whether it's all in public, all educational institutions, whether it's public, but we submit what we're submitting, and then we give at least understanding what the county attorney's counter argument is. We give our argument as to why we, as the Human Rights Commission, believe that it's necessary now and why it's imperative for them to do. And I think that will be very helpful in having them understand why it's so important and why we want to do it now.
Whitney, thank you
Can I
so
ask
much
a
for,
question?
oh, I'm sorry, Stefan, go ahead.
Whitney, that was really informative and compelling. And I really appreciate all the work that you've done on this over many years. I think it's really important. I guess what I don't know, and this is kind of ignorance of the legal framework. The commission has some bully pulpit influence. We can do things and we can speak out and all of that. But do we have I guess, and this is the issue I think you were alluding to, do we have the legal right to control processes and changes in the school? And is it the county that actually, if the ordinance doesn't currently anticipate that, does the county actually think that they don't have the right under the Dillon rule to kind of mix the county and the school issues? So I'm speaking from ignorance, and basically ignorance from the last time I was on the commission, which was rather than, I don't know what's happened much in the last 10 years or so, but can you speak to that?
So we can ask and suggest and recommend. The county board does not have to take the action. They don't have to agree by any stretch of the imagination. But we also, we have the right to recommend. They have the right to either agree, not agree, do what we're proposing, not do it. There is the concept of media and transparency and how things look, right? So if you've got children dying in schools, and the Human Rights Commission is suggesting that the schools should be investigated, and the county acknowledges that there's no, so right now, the way that it stands, the schools investigate themselves.
Right.
And the superintendent, who himself was on the Human Rights Commission in Alexandria, where he resides, has acknowledged that he believes that the ordinance should include at least the public schools. So in a time and place where if at any minute something can become newsworthy, I think that it's not so much that we can control it or we can't mandate that the county do it, but we can suggest highly the reasons why it's in the best interest of the county to do this, as opposed to continuing to do nothing. And what I will say is, the people aren't on the county board because they don't care about people and children. So these are people who it's supposed to be a part-time job. It's not. So they're public servants, absolutely, and they do care. We are doing is we are in our advisory capacity suggesting a mechanism for them to be doing something that they're kind of questioning what they have not been able to do or not, or can, which is how do we make sure that the schools are functioning in a manner which is consistent with not only just our equity resolution, but our human rights ordinance and just who we as individuals, how we want our community to be. So it's more of that advisory recommending.
Can I say one more thing? And I'm sorry for asking another follow-up. My sense from when the county attorney weighed in, whenever it was last summer, that they seemed to be very risk adverse and they didn't want to use additional resources. I think that both of those things are to a degree bogus, but I wonder, did they also weigh in on this issue and say, we don't think we have, did they weigh in on whether it was appropriate for us to be involved with this, or do they just, they didn't?
I'll take that one. I'll take that one, Whitney, just really quick. And I track your question, Stefan, exactly. And the only other update for the benefit of this group is about an hour and a half ago, we got an itemized list of issues from the county attorney's office with the latest markup. And what is conspicuously missing, Stefan, is an argument that we don't. Now, she may still make it, but she did not say in her issues list that she thinks that it's jurisdictionally problematic under Dillon's rule. Now, candidly, I've not done a really deep dive into the issue, but my very cursory review of it is that I agree 150% with everything that Whitney just said about what our role is on the advisory side, right? On sort of leveraging aspirationally what the county should do and should explore ways to change if there is a Dillon rule friction, right? That might be our lobbying effort with the General Assembly next year or the like. But I think that we probably do have a bit of wiggle to suggest that there is no reason why our ordinance could not encompass schools. And I really liked, Whitney, what you had just said, because it distilled perfectly down to this issue of how can the county schools be governing and investigating themselves on issues of this material importance, right? So I'm optimistic, Stefan, that we're not going to get a precise Dillon's rule challenge on the jurisdictional issue. Could be coming, but it's not in what came across before. Just for the sake of completeness and to build on what Whitney said, and again, let me just echo my thanks to you. That was really, really fulsome, and I appreciate all the informational overview of it, but more importantly, the work that you're doing and have been for so many years. It sounds like your work was well received and was excellently and beautifully articulated, and obviously one of the most important things we could do as a commission. So we were optimistic, the drafting committee was anyway, that with all of the iteration work that we had done in incorporating the county attorney's feedback from last summer, I think Stephen and I were hoping we would have sent that across and she would have been like, looks good, 2 issues. Nope, we got sort of 8 or 9 issues that came through, which says to me, the exercise of getting the full package completely vetted through county attorney's office is going to take time, right? And is not something that even if we tee it up to the county board in April, they're going to send it back over to county attorney and they're going to iterate on a number of these issues. All the while we're waiting to get the answer on this schools issue. Okay. So to put a really fine point on the options that we see at the drafting committee level, all right, Option one, in light of the urgency that we're hearing Whitney talk about in terms of getting schools jurisdictionally covered by our ordinance so that we have investigative authority and some recourse for marginalized folks that should have access to the protections of our ordinance, we do a very, very streamlined markup right now, where all we do is make the jurisdictional change to say, and by the way, the current version of the ordinance says, these rules apply to any and all private schools. So what's accepted from the current version of the ordinance are public schools and public universities. Okay. So option one right now is a very, very light markup that just changes that to say any public or private school or university, so that we're very explicitly picking up jurisdictionally schools within the scope of our ordinance. That will be like, if you think about the red line, that's like a little bit of red on the page in one section, and everything else will look like the 2020 ordinance. And as Whitney is describing, along with that would be a bit of an advocacy piece that we would write on behalf of the commission, explaining the why we think that this is important and explaining the urgency, while previewing that there is an ongoing work stream to make other critical and necessary changes, but that may have less urgency than this one. Okay. So option one is we jurisdictionally cover schools. We do it now, and we continue to push hard with county attorney. Option two, other end of the spectrum. Okay, maybe in the next week or two, the drafting committee takes on board the edits that we got from county attorney, incorporates them, does whatever we can within our comfort zone to get those revised, right? And then we submit the entire package as is to the board. It will include schools, but it may not be immediately approved, but we're on record showing exactly what we are asking for. And we've done a lot of work, and this has been pending since 2020. And so it's long overdue. Okay, so that's whole hog. All right. The third option is we take a very measured approach. So not as light a red line as just schools, but we add things that we think are urgent. And the top things that I think from an ordinance committee perspective are probably the highest priority are schools, fixing some of the issues with the current statute around protections for persons with disabilities, because the statute is wildly antiquated in that regard, adding source of funds, which is an issue that we have been talking about for 2 years, particularly in the housing context, and adding conversion therapy, which tracks directly to what's already in the Virginia Code, so certainly has no Dillon rule issues. And that, I asked you guys to pin this before, that dovetails with what Sean is solving for over on the Equality Task Force side, because that's one more thing that will foster our Municipality Equality Index score, MEI score. Okay, so it's sort of the middle ground, a slightly heavier markup, but not quite as fulsome as all of the things that we'd like to add. And even with that middle ground markup, we would still do the advocacy piece on the why we need this and preview that more is coming, but there's further cycles to be done with county attorney. Okay, so that's the framing. Super light markup, urgent right now. We do it, we submit it, we can turn it around tomorrow and send it in the door. Okay, middle ground markup, maybe it will take a week or two longer to get that advocacy piece written, or 3 whole hog. So let me stop there, having presented what the options are. And Whitney, I appreciate you sort of previewed your view on this. And I think you and I have separately talked to Chris to get his perspective on it, because Chris could not be here tonight, but he wanted the two of us to share his views. I think he is aligned with you, Whitney, in thinking that given the urgency of schools and the inevitable cycle with county attorney's office, lighter markup for now with preview of what's coming. Okay. Do other folks have a different point of view on this, or other thoughts you want to add to the discussion? Roland.
Yes. Thank you, Whitney, for the very good update. I think that we should move on option 1, and the reason why is this. Dealing with the schools has not been something that we have just started to relate to. We've had an educational task force that was put in place, and the educational task force has been working for about 2 years. Whitney has been pretty much the chair of it. On that task force, we work with parents, we work with students on the task force. We also have had people from the school board to actually come and speak to the task force, individuals such as their diversity officer. And I think, and I'm subject to correction by Whitney and by Stephen, I think we even had the chief of staff to the school board to actually come and speak to the education task force. So this is something that we have been dealing with for about several years. And I think the matter of the schools is so urgent that I think that it is something that we being a commission should put it before the county board for pretty much consideration right now. I'm a little concerned that if we start putting in option 3, even all of those which are in option 3, which really are not a lot, but that then the board would be looking at all of the other things which would be proposed, such as disabilities, source of funds, conversion therapy, and they would be sort of expanding the consideration of it to the extent that it may take more time. The question as to whether or not we want to look at jurisdiction of the schools is pretty simple. It's not a complicated thing to consider. Certainly in municipalities here in this area, the Human Rights Commission has authority over schools. If you look at the Human Rights Ordinance there for Alexandria, it has some jurisdiction pretty much over public schools there as well. So I think that because of the sheer importance of this, that this is something that we should put before the county board right now. And by the way, in the discussions that the draft committee has had with the city attorney, they didn't say that jurisdiction or our request to assert jurisdiction would violate in any way the Dillon rule. They made it a point of saying that it did not violate the Dillon rule. They just used the term policy considerations for the whole thing. So legally, I think we would be pretty much on sound ground by doing it. So I'm all in favor pretty much of option 1. Okay.
Thanks, Roland. Thank you. Sean? I'm sorry, Stephen, I was going by hands here.
No, Stephen, go ahead and I'll go after you.
I did not raise my hand. I will go to the end of the list.
My comments really quick, and I concur with Roland's comments and Roland's point and Whitney's as well. The further we kick the can down the road, the longer we wait and we get nothing done. And so we end up in the same situation that we've been in for the past several years prior to my time. And so to engage at this time is the most effective time to do so. So that way we can get the ball rolling. So we can get the county, to get the board engaged, to get the county attorney engaged. Because if there are any type of legal conflicts, that we're able to resolve those quicker at the front versus getting everything through, and then at the backside find out there's a legal challenge to some aspect within the ordinance itself. So I totally concur with that, and the course ahead, getting it to the board.
Thank you, Sean. Stephen?
Thank you. So I'll just be really brief about this. I don't think there's any maybe dissent or opposition, but I just want for the record to be clear that my position is that if you combine all of the other edits to the ordinance that we're talking about, they will not get anywhere close to the possible impact to this one edit regarding the schools we'll have in Arlington County. And so with that, I certainly support option 1. My only hesitation is that if it takes us as long to draft our advocacy piece, then perhaps we consider option 2 as well, if we're going to be waiting anyway. So if advocacy piece can get done relatively quickly to get option 1 out the door ASAP, let's do it. If we think we're going to need a few weeks or a month to get that paper written and circulated and approved and edited and whatever else has to happen to it, then perhaps during that time we can work on option 2.
Thanks, Stephen. I think that's a really good point about, the trying to get it done very, very quickly. And on that point, I would ask for maybe Stephen, Whitney, you and I could, the three of us could maybe convene and think through what is our strongest positioning in that regard to put that advocacy piece together. I think, Whitney, you have a lot of the facts, statistics, and the data points around the urgency. And then we can sort of layer in, some of the other legal considerations as well, Stephen, that we've been working towards. Does that work, Stephen and Whitney?
That's fine with me.
Yes, right. No, that makes perfect sense. Yes.
Great. Okay. Sean, is your hand up again? Okay.
I'll lower it,
I
sorry.
saw, no worries at all. Stefan, I thought I saw your hand raised.
Yeah. I'm frankly fine with whatever. Option 1 sounds good, but I wonder whether there's a possibility of putting this, of kind of doing 2 presentations to the county board simultaneously. One flagging the school issues and saying why we think it's so important and so important now, and then everything else as a separate thing, but not waiting a year to present it to them, so that they have the same information. They know why we've segregated out one set of issues, but maybe it would move everything forward.
And Stefan, in your just sort of building out your straw man, would you suggest sending the sort of current version of the entire package that is still subject to county attorney's review so that the board members have a line of sight on what we're proposing? Or would you suggest waiting until we get through the next, month or 2 of cycles with Ginny Sadler?
I guess I'd respond with a question. So if we don't do everything now, we don't necessarily have to wait another year or more for them to consider these kind of issues.
I think our thinking with option 1 would be within the next week or 2. We have the marked ordinance, the advocacy piece, and we submit it up to the board under HRC letterhead, right? And if we do that at the same time, we'll still be working with county attorney's office to try to resolve her issues list. And literally, as soon as we are done modifying whatever we can before we're at a policy impasse, we would then package that up under separate cover and send that along as well. And so, in a perfect world, I can see the schools modification amendment going up in April and the other piece going up in the summer, right? If we move fast enough. And so I guess the question back to you is, if that was the cadence that we could shoot towards, does that sit right with you? Or are you thinking that we just go ahead and do it all in April and say, this is the current version, we're working on it, but it's coming back to you?
I didn't realize that was a possibility. I actually think that would be better. A, we get 2 bites at the apple, and B, the school stuff doesn't get kind of junked in with everything else and kind of lost, and they go off on some other particular point and kind of miss the big one. I'd be comfortable with that if you think we actually would be able to make 2 presentations or send 2 things up and not wait another year for the second one.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't. Sorry, Whitney, go ahead.
No, thank you. So I agree. So what I've basically been saying is this is coming. We've been waiting on all these things for years. Now we're at a point where this is an emergency. You guys are like, we don't know what to do. The schools are like, we don't know what to do. But what I've also been saying is this is also a time to look at this as an emergency, but to recognize that this is not a good way to do business. Waiting for the emergency and having to piecemeal things is actually not a good way to do it. So we're going to take this and have you vote on this now, but with the understanding that all of these other things are coming, and we would like for you to not sit on them for 2 years, to have God only knows what happens in 18 months happen. So then we have to go through the same type of thing and piecemeal it. So they do understand it. From a strategy point of view, To the extent that I understand that I understand the pull when you are a county employee, but to the extent that we are coming with not just good policy, excellent legal concepts of with our neighboring partner, neighboring jurisdictions who are doing this, but there's a huge ethical issue, right? Where the human rights, so it's not just law, it's also ethics, it's morals, it's who are we as a community. And there's the strategy in, if we're getting a lot of pushback from the county attorney on just being like, hey, maybe someone other than the schools should be looking at what the schools are doing, then that also is going to make sure the county board, when they're going to be set up, because we've been talking about this, to understand what's more important, covering your behind and making sure that like there's a lot, listen, including the schools means a lot more liability. There's a lot more people. There's a lot more work that has to be done. No one is suggesting that that's not the case. What we're saying is there's a moral imperative to not make that the number one thought. So if what we're doing is being pushed back by, yes, but this is a lot more work, then that actually may, if that's really the argument, if that's the big policy argument, is that it's hard, then when we come back with these other things, the county board is already understanding that the county attorney's office is coming from, yeah, but we just don't want to do this much more work because it's hard, even though we're talking about people's human rights that may or may not be important. So from a strategy perspective, if we're getting pushback on the one little thing that we're asking, which from a human rights perspective is highly reasonable, and again, one could suggest is a moral imperative based on the equity resolution that was passed by Christian Dorsey when he was the chair 4 years ago and is the current chair. If there's pushback there, then this is a really good strategy way for us to get it across, with the understanding that what we care about in our commission is the human rights of the people who live and work and are educated in Arlington, and that's our number one concern.
Yeah, Roland. Thanks, Whitney.
I see nothing wrong with sending just option one up there immediately, even though there are several things that we're pretty much doing. Because in the past, we have sent, as a commission, several things up to the county board, and some of them the county board worked on, and some of them the county board hasn't. For example, the bullying policy has been up there for 5 years. So we have proposed something like that for 5 years, and they still haven't done it. The source of income, we have endorsed pretty much the source of income. Nothing has pretty much been done pretty much on that. Although there are outside groups which pressured the chairman of the board at a recent meeting of the NAACP as to what they're going to do. Surprisingly enough, when the chairman of the county board appeared before the NAACP, the first two questions that he asked dealt with the Human Rights Commission and dealt with the Human Rights Ordinance. So there is a concern pretty much out there by people regarding what the ordinance should be doing and the groups that the ordinance should be covering. And I think for us to send this up as a separate thing to the board would emphasize to the county board that the commission thinks that this is very, very important and should be considered now. And then the county board can decide pretty much what they're going to do with it. The city attorney is already on notice regarding it because, as everyone knows, the city attorney is really the attorney to the county board. So whenever we talk to the city attorney, we really are talking to the attorneys to the county board. So they know everything about the ordinance, and we've been working with them, and they know legally what can be done and what can't be done. And so if we present this to them, they're certainly not going to be surprised about it. And I frankly think they probably have discussed something like this with the county board members. But I think we as members of the commission have to deal with our statutory obligation. And our statutory obligation is very clear in the statute, is that we have the duty to recommend to the county board changes in the ordinance that we think would be necessary in order to fulfill civil rights pretty much in Arlington County. And I think this is one of those things that we pretty much should be doing. And I think we have a statutory obligation to do it.
Thanks, Roland. And to build on that, I think it's just simply not uncommon that there's iteration to an ordinance and there are amendments that happen over time. This happens with federal statutes. This happens with other jurisdictions, ordinances, and statutes. So I'm not overly concerned about the notion of doing this now and then having a subsequent update after we get over the hurdle, the prioritized one. Frankly, if you look at the history of our ordinance, it was updated in 2012. It was updated again in 2020. Now it will be 23, hopefully later in 23. So I think there is a precedent for that too. Any other comments or discussion points before we take a motion here? Okay. Well, Roland, you were the first to introduce option 1. Can I ask for you to make the motion on the record here?
Sure. I move that the Human Rights Commission adopt option 1.
And option 1 being the light markup to jurisdictionally cover schools within the scope of the ordinance alongside of the advocacy piece, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Any second to the motion?
I second.
I second.
All in favor?
Can I make have a question? Is there a way that as part of the advocacy piece, we could allude that the other stuff is coming? Like put it into the document that this is not the be all and end all, or some
I think
other,
so.
or some
Absolutely.
other way. But
I think so.
I think
I
that
think we could
part
bake
of
that
our
into the
argument.
framing. Go ahead, Whitney.
I'm sorry, Helen, but I think that that's actually part of our argument, right? That we don't want to have to keep piecemealing this. We don't want to have to wait till emergencies. These are the types of things that we've been asking for you to do. These are what's coming. And I mean, we can, the wordsmithing it, but I think that that's absolutely appropriate and actually helps our argument in why this really could have been done differently. And we shouldn't have had to wait for 2 years in the first place.
Great.
Okay, so to put a really fine point on the motion, it's option 1, jurisdictionally covering schools with the advocacy piece with the preview that more is coming. That is the motion on the table. Okay. As modified, all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, guys, we have a game plan. Well done, team, on an ordinance strategy. So in terms of next steps, Whitney, Stephen, and I will put our pens to paper on the advocacy piece, and we will circulate it for awareness. Now, there's a governance point here. I don't know that we're going to be able to vote without calling another meeting on the advocacy piece. But if anybody happens to see anything that they'd like to add, please private message the two of us so that we don't create another separate meeting. Roland, do you have your hand up?
Yes. I just want to make a point, that is, I don't think that we should let the advocacy piece be the means to delay getting this up to the county board. So I say that because I think that having approved the option, I pretty much am very comfortable just leaving it up to the chair to draft the advocacy piece, and the chair can consult with what other members of the commission that the chair so desire. In the past, when we have sent these prospective changes up to the county board, it has been done just through a letter from the chair to the members of the county board. I understand the significance of wanting to do the advocacy piece, but I'm just a little bit concerned that it may take some time to do the piece and then to sort of run it by all of the members, pretty much of the commission. And then some members of the commission may come back later and say, oh, I didn't have the opportunity to respond to this, or you didn't show me this. I'm very, very comfortable with just letting the chair have total control over the submission of the piece, drafting it and submitting it.
Roland, thank you for that. Anybody have a different point of view on that? If not, I am happy to work with Stephen and Whitney, and we'll get it out and we'll drive it to completion. Excellent. Okay, I think we have gotten through pretty much our entire agenda. Before we break, let me just open it up to see if anybody else has anything to add by way of member reports. There are going to be a lot of other things that we'll talk about with a broader group, but I really reserved our time today on ordinance and not got too detailed in the separate member reports.
This isn't a report, but a question. I thought we had a good conversation last summer or fall with the sheriff. I thought it was useful, not perfect, but useful. I wonder if after the upcoming elections, we could invite the new sheriff at some point this fall to talk about similar concerns and make sure that that's on his radar screen.
Excellent idea. Gurjeet, can we work with you to set that up after the elections?
Sure. Which month are you thinking then?
So I don't, what is the election that the election is in June. I assume that the person who wins in June probably is going to win in November. Do you think we need to wait until after the general for this, or?
If I can, so yes, there's a primary in June and then there's a general election in November. The acting sheriff can come and speak to us in or before, whomever is campaigning. There will be it'll be an easier campaign after June. There'll be an easier campaign after June. So waiting until after November isn't necessarily the issue. If what we're really garnering, if what you want, Stephen, is like more of a concept about what's going on in the jails and what the current sheriff has been doing and what will continue, I think it sounds like what you're saying is sometime after June, even if it's technically before the actual general election, might work.
Yeah. Stefan, does that track with what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's the possibility a lot of people running, he could lose. And if he's going to lose, then we want to wait until whoever's going to win. But other than that, I think.
Right. But I mean, he will have been the sheriff for a year. So he will have been putting things in place. He will have been, there's still the opportunity to talk. He is the sheriff. And as a person who's talked to him, there are differences even now that he's instilled from his predecessor. So regardless really of the election, it would not be untimely to have a talk with him regarding what he's put in place in the year that he's been the sheriff.
Yeah. You know, we are off in August as per our usual cadence. And we just still have not gotten a date for the Tiffany Jocelyn Forum. So I'll suggest maybe in the May meeting, if there's time, and that's going to be when we have our affirmative action plan vendor. So that will be a heavy docket. But in the May meeting, maybe we'll take a look at our upcoming month's meetings and we'll work on finding a good opportunity to slot him in, Gurjeet, and then we'll ask for your assistance in teeing that up.
Sounds good.
Okay, any other comments, updates? Okay, team. Well, thank you all for the spirited discussion. We've reached a really good outcome here. I appreciate everybody's participation and really hard work. Whitney, thank you for the excellent work you're doing on the lobbying front, and to the entire drafting committee. Excellent job on putting pen to paper. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Excellent. See y'all next month. And Stephen and Whitney, I'll see you on email shortly.
Hey, everybody.